Marcus Thompson had everything money could buy, but apparently it couldn't purchase common sense or basic respect. The 35-year-old tech mogul stood outside Buckingham Palace on a crisp Tuesday morning, his designer suit perfectly pressed and his ego inflated beyond measure. He had flown from Silicon Valley to London specifically to attend a charity gala, but today he had different plans. "Watch this," Marcus whispered to his assistant Sarah, who looked increasingly uncomfortable as her boss's voice carried that familiar tone of arrogance. "I'm going to show these costume-wearing toy soldiers what real authority looks like." The Queen's Guard stood motionless at his post, rifle in hand, red tunic immaculate, and bearskin hat sitting perfectly atop his head. His name was Lance Corporal James Mitchell, though Marcus neither knew nor cared about such details. To Marcus, the guard was simply another obstacle to be conquered, another person to be impressed by his wealth and status. Marcus had built his fortune by pushing boundaries and breaking rules. He owned 3 tech companies, had a net worth that placed him among the world's elite, and believed that money was the universal language that could open any door. Today, he was about to learn that some doors remained firmly shut, regardless of the size of one's bank account. The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard as tourists gathered to witness the famous changing of the guard ceremony. Families with children pointed excitedly at the stoic soldiers, cameras clicked constantly, and tour guides shared historical facts about the ancient traditions. But Marcus wasn't interested in tradition or history. He was interested in proving a point. "Sir, perhaps we should just take our photos and move along," Sarah suggested, her voice barely above a whisper. She had worked for Marcus for 3 years and had witnessed his confrontational behavior before, but never in a setting quite like this. Marcus ignored her completely. He approached the guard with the swagger of someone who had never been told no and genuinely believed he never would be. His expensive leather shoes clicked against the pavement as he closed the distance between himself and Lance Corporal Mitchell. "Hey, you!" Marcus called out loudly, causing nearby tourists to turn and stare. "Yes, you in the silly hat. I need you to move. I want to take a selfie right where you're standing, and I'm willing to pay for the privilege." The guard remained perfectly still, his eyes fixed straight ahead as he had been trained. Lance Corporal Mitchell had served 2 tours in Afghanistan and had been selected for this prestigious position based on his exemplary service record and unshakable discipline. He had faced real danger and genuine threats, so one arrogant tourist certainly wasn't going to break his composure. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick wad of cash, waving it in front of the guard's face. "Come on, soldier boy. This is more money than you make in a month. All you have to do is step aside for 5 minutes." The crowd of tourists began to murmur among themselves. Some looked shocked at Marcus's behavior, while others seemed fascinated to see how this confrontation would unfold. Children tugged at their parents' sleeves, asking why the man was being mean to the guard. Elderly visitors shook their heads in disapproval, remembering a time when respect for tradition and authority was considered basic decency. "Are you deaf?" Marcus raised his voice even louder, his face beginning to redden with frustration. "I'm talking to you. Do you know who I am? I could buy this entire palace if I wanted to. The least you can do is show me some basic courtesy." Sarah stepped closer to her boss, her face flushed with embarrassment. "Marcus, please. People are staring. This isn't appropriate." "Appropriate?" Marcus spun around to face her, his voice now loud enough that tourists 50 feet away could hear every word. "What's not appropriate is some minimum wage actor in a costume ignoring a taxpayer who probably contributes more to this country's economy in 1 year than he'll make in his entire lifetime." The guard's training was absolute. Despite Marcus's increasingly aggressive behavior, Lance Corporal Mitchell's breathing remained steady, his posture unchanged, and his gaze fixed on the horizon. He had been taught that the uniform he wore represented something far greater than himself. centuries of tradition, honor, and service to the crown. Marcus's frustration reached a boiling point. He had never encountered someone who couldn't be bought, intimidated, or impressed by his status. In his world of corporate boardrooms and exclusive clubs, money and power were the only currencies that mattered. But here, standing before a man who had sworn an oath to something beyond personal gain, Marcus was discovering the limits of his influence. "Fine," Marcus announced dramatically, loud enough for the entire crowd to hear. "If you won't accept my generous offer, then I'll just stand here until you acknowledge me. I have all day, and unlike you, I don't have to stand at attention like some kind of robot." What Marcus didn't realize was that his behavior was being closely monitored by several other individuals who weren't quite as visible as the guard he was harassing. The Metropolitan Police had officers stationed throughout the area, and palace security personnel watched every interaction through sophisticated camera systems. More importantly, there were other guards positioned nearby who were perfectly capable of movement when circumstances required it. Detective Inspector Rachel Williams had been observing the situation from the moment Marcus first raised his voice. A 15-year veteran of the force, she had seen every type of troublemaker imaginable, but wealthy tourists who believed they were above the law always presented a special challenge. They had expensive lawyers, political connections, and the arrogance to believe that consequences were for other people. Marcus decided to escalate his performance. He pulled out his phone and began recording himself, speaking directly into the camera. "This is Marcus Thompson, and I'm currently being ignored by what appears to be the world's most overpaid street performer. This is exactly the kind of inefficiency and waste that happens when governments employ people who can't even provide basic customer service." The guard remained motionless, but something had changed in the atmosphere around the palace. Several tourists had started their own recordings, documenting Marcus's increasingly erratic behavior. Social media notifications were already beginning to ping as videos were uploaded with captions like "American billionaire harassing Queen's Guard" and "When privilege meets reality." Marcus was completely oblivious to the fact that his actions were being broadcast to the world in real time. He was so focused on what he perceived as his personal battle with the guard that he failed to notice the crowd's mood shifting from curiosity to disgust. What had started as an amusing spectacle was now becoming genuinely uncomfortable to witness. "You know what?" Marcus announced, putting his phone away and reaching into his other pocket. "Maybe cash isn't the right motivation. Let me try a different approach." He pulled out his business card and attempted to shove it into the guard's jacket pocket. This physical contact crossed a line that had serious consequences. Lance Corporal Mitchell was authorized to respond to any attempt to touch him or his equipment, but his training emphasized restraint and proper protocol. Instead of reacting physically, he finally broke his silence. "Sir, you need to step back immediately," the guard said in a clear, authoritative voice that carried across the courtyard. "Any further physical contact will result in your immediate detention." Marcus laughed loudly, clearly delighted that he had finally gotten a response. "There we go. I knew you could talk. Now we're getting somewhere. So tell me, how much would it take for you to abandon your post for 10 minutes? What Marcus didn't realize was that the guard's verbal warning was actually the final step in a well-established protocol. Detective Inspector Williams was already moving through the crowd, her badge ready and her patience exhausted. The palace's security chief had been in radio contact with the Metropolitan Police from the moment Marcus first approached the guard, and now it was time to bring this embarrassing spectacle to an end. The crowd had grown considerably larger as word of the confrontation spread through the tourist area. Some people were actively encouraging Marcus to continue, treating the situation like entertainment, while others looked genuinely concerned about the guard's welfare. Several parents had moved their children away from the immediate area, sensing that the situation was about to escalate beyond mere verbal harassment. Marcus reached into his jacket again, this time producing a gold-plated pen. "Here's what we're going to do, soldier. I'm going to write you a check for 10,000 pounds, right here, right now. All you have to do is smile and pose for one picture with me. Think of it as the easiest money you'll ever make." The guard's response was immediate and professional. "Sir, I am ordering you to step back and cease this behavior immediately. You are in violation of several public order offenses, and continued harassment will result in your arrest." Marcus threw his head back and laughed even louder. "Arrest? You're going to arrest me? Do you have any idea what kind of legal team I have? I could tie up your entire judicial system for years. Besides, what exactly am I being arrested for? Having a conversation?" Detective Inspector Williams chose that moment to step forward, her badge clearly visible, and her voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone who had dealt with difficult people for most of her career. "Marcus Thompson, I presume? I'm Detective Inspector Williams with the Metropolitan Police. You're under arrest for harassment, disorderly conduct, and violation of public order." The color drained from Marcus's face as he turned to see the police officer approaching. This wasn't part of his plan. In his mind, he was simply having a bit of fun with what he assumed was a powerless individual. The possibility that there might be actual consequences for his behavior had never occurred to him. "Wait just a minute," Marcus stammered, his confident demeanor suddenly replaced by panic. "This is clearly a misunderstanding. I was just trying to take a photograph. Surely we can work something out here. I'm a very generous donor to police charities." Detective Inspector Williams continued her approach, her handcuffs already visible. "Mr. Thompson, you have the right to remain silent, but it may harm your defense if you do not mention when questioned something which you later rely on in court." The crowd of tourists had now formed a complete circle around the unfolding drama. Cameras were recording from every angle, and Marcus was beginning to realize that his morning entertainment had turned into a very public nightmare. Sarah stood at the edge of the crowd, her face buried in her hands, already imagining the phone calls she would need to make to Marcus's legal team. "This is ridiculous!" Marcus shouted, his voice now carrying a note of desperation. "I'm an American citizen. I have rights. You can't just arrest me for talking to someone." Detective Inspector Williams reached Marcus's position and calmly placed her hand on his shoulder. "Mr. Thompson, harassment is a criminal offense in the United Kingdom, regardless of your nationality or financial status. Attempting to bribe a member of Her Majesty's Armed Forces is also a serious matter. You'll need to come with me now." As the handcuffs clicked into place around Marcus's wrists, the crowd began to applaud. The Queen's Guard remained at his post, still motionless, still professional, having handled the situation exactly as his training dictated. Lance Corporal Mitchell had neither moved from his position nor compromised his duty, despite 15 minutes of sustained harassment from someone who believed that rules didn't apply to him. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. Marcus Thompson, who had approached the situation believing he could demonstrate his superiority over what he saw as a powerless individual, was now being led away in handcuffs, while the guard he had tried to humiliate remained standing proud and dignified at his post. Social media exploded within minutes. Videos of Marcus's arrest were shared thousands of times, accompanied by comments ranging from righteous satisfaction to shocked disbelief that anyone could be so disrespectful. The hashtag $privilege began trending as people shared the footage across multiple platforms. As Detective Inspector Williams escorted Marcus toward the waiting police vehicle, he made one final attempt to salvage his dignity. "This isn't over. I'll have my lawyers contact the American Embassy. You have no idea who you're dealing with." The detective's response was calm and professional. "Mr. Thompson, I know exactly who I'm dealing with. You're someone who believed that money could buy you exemption from basic decency and common law. You were wrong on both counts." The police car door closed with a definitive click, and Marcus Thompson's lesson in humility officially began. Meanwhile, Lance Corporal Mitchell continued his duty, protecting a tradition that had endured for centuries and would continue long after today's events were forgotten by everyone except the man who learned that some things in life cannot be purchased, intimidated, or impressed into submission. Victoria Ashworth considered herself London royalty, though her only connection to actual royalty was the overpriced apartment she rented in Kensington. The 28-year-old social media influencer had built her entire identity around projecting wealth, status, and superiority to her 2 million followers. Today, she was planning to create content that would showcase her supposed importance, but her target was poorly chosen. Standing outside Windsor Castle on a busy Saturday afternoon, Victoria adjusted her designer sunglasses and checked her appearance in her phone's camera one final time. She had spent 3 hours getting ready for this moment, complete with professional hairstyling and makeup that had cost more than most people earned in a week. Her outfit was carefully curated to project effortless elegance while actually representing several £1,000s worth of designer clothing. "Okay, darling viewers," Victoria spoke into her phone camera, her voice carrying the affected accent she had perfected over years of trying to sound more posh than her middle-class upbringing suggested. "Today we're going to do something absolutely divine. I'm going to show you how to get the most exclusive content by knowing exactly how to handle these lovely gentlemen in red." The Queen's Guard she had chosen as her prop was Guardsman Thomas Crawford, a 26-year-old soldier who had earned his position through years of dedicated service and an unblemished record. He stood perfectly still at his assigned post, rifle at the ready, his face a mask of professional composure beneath his iconic bearskin hat. Victoria saw him as nothing more than a living mannequin for her social media production. Victoria's assistant, Emma, held a professional camera and lighting equipment, documenting every moment for what Victoria believed would be her most viral content yet. They had scouted the location earlier in the week, timing the guard rotations and identifying the spot with the best lighting for photographs. Victoria had even researched the guards' protocols online, though she had clearly misunderstood their significance. "The key to getting amazing content," Victoria continued speaking to her phone while gesturing toward Guardsman Crawford, "is knowing that these guards are basically just actors. They're paid to stand there and look pretty for tourists, so really, we're helping them do their jobs by including them in our content." Several tourists nearby stopped to watch Victoria's performance, initially assuming she might be a legitimate journalist or documentary filmmaker. Her professional equipment and confident demeanor suggested authority, though her actual words quickly revealed the true nature of her intentions. Victoria approached the guard with the calculated confidence of someone who had built a career on manipulating situations for social media content. She had successfully convinced restaurant managers to provide free meals, hotel staff to upgrade her accommodations, and boutique owners to lend her expensive jewelry, all in exchange for exposure to her followers. She assumed this situation would follow the same pattern. "Hello there, gorgeous," Victoria said loudly, positioning herself directly in front of Guardsman Crawford. "I'm Victoria Ashworth. Perhaps you've heard of me. I have over 2 million followers across my platforms, and I'd love to feature you in today's content. Think of the exposure this could provide for tourism." The guard remained absolutely motionless, his training having prepared him for exactly this type of situation. Guardsman Crawford had served with distinction in several international deployments and understood that his current role was about far more than standing still for photographs. He represented centuries of military tradition and service to the crown, responsibilities that weren't diminished by civilian misunderstanding. Victoria seemed genuinely surprised by the lack of response. In her experience, people were usually eager to appear in her content, understanding the value of social media exposure in the modern economy. She interpreted the guard's silence as shyness rather than professionalism. "Oh, don't be nervous," Victoria laughed, moving even closer to the guard. "I know this might be your first time being featured by someone with my reach, but I promise it will be amazing for your career. Just think about how many people will see you looking absolutely fantastic in uniform." Emma continued filming while tourists gathered around the developing spectacle. Some visitors looked uncomfortable with Victoria's behavior, particularly those who understood the solemnity of the guard's role, but others seemed entertained by what they assumed was harmless interaction with a local celebrity. Victoria decided to escalate her approach when subtle manipulation failed to achieve the desired result. She moved to stand directly beside Guardsman Crawford, positioning herself for what she imagined would be the perfect selfie opportunity. "This is going to be absolutely perfect," Victoria announced to her camera. "My followers are going to absolutely love this authentic British experience. Now, handsome, I just need you to turn slightly toward the camera, just a little bit. I promise this will only take a moment." When the guard failed to respond to her direction, Victoria's frustration began to show through her carefully maintained facade. She was accustomed to controlling every aspect of her content creation, and having a subject who refused to cooperate was genuinely confusing for her. "Excuse me?" Victoria said more loudly, waving her perfectly manicured hand in front of the guard's face. "I know you can hear me. This is a mutually beneficial arrangement. You get fantastic exposure, and I get authentic content. Everyone wins." Security personnel stationed throughout Windsor Castle had been monitoring Victoria's behavior from the moment she began her loud performance. Chief Inspector David Morrison had 22 years of experience protecting royal residences and had seen every conceivable type of inappropriate tourist behavior. Victoria's conduct was escalating in exactly the pattern that typically required intervention. Victoria's next move demonstrated either remarkable ignorance or intentional disrespect for the guard's role. She reached out and actually touched Guardsman Crawford's rifle, attempting to pose with the weapon for her photograph. "This is so authentic," Victoria gushed to her camera. "My followers are going to be absolutely obsessed with this content. You simply cannot get this kind of access anywhere else." The moment Victoria made physical contact with his equipment, Guardsman Crawford was required to respond according to strict protocols. His voice was clear and authoritative as he delivered the standard warning. "Ma'am, step away from the guard and do not touch any equipment. This is your only warning." Victoria's reaction was immediate delight rather than concern. Finally, she had gotten the response she wanted for her content. She turned to face her camera with genuine excitement. "Did you hear that, darlings? We've got him talking. This is exactly the kind of exclusive access that makes my content so special. No other influencer gets this level of authentic interaction." What Victoria failed to understand was that the guard's verbal warning wasn't the beginning of a conversation. It was the final step before more serious consequences. Chief Inspector Morrison was already moving through the crowd, his radio crackling with updates from other security personnel who had been tracking the situation. Victoria decided to push further, interpreting the guard's warning as successful engagement rather than a clear directive to stop her behavior. She moved even closer to Guardsman Crawford, attempting to position herself for what she believed would be the perfect shot. "Come on now, don't be shy," Victoria cooed, reaching out to touch the guard's arm. "Just one little smile for the camera. Think about how many people will see this." The physical contact triggered an immediate response from multiple security personnel. Chief Inspector Morrison appeared beside Victoria so quickly that she jumped in surprise, nearly dropping her phone in the process. "Ma'am, I'm Chief Inspector Morrison with Windsor Castle Security. You need to step away from the guard immediately and come with me." Victoria's confidence wavered for the first time since beginning her performance. The inspector's tone carried unmistakable authority, and suddenly the situation felt less like content creation and more like genuine trouble. "Oh, there's clearly been some misunderstanding," Victoria said, her voice rising an octave as panic began to set in. "I'm Victoria Ashworth. I'm quite well known, actually. I was just creating some content showcasing the wonderful traditions here at Windsor. Surely there's no harm in that." Chief Inspector Morrison's expression remained completely professional as he gestured for Victoria to move away from the guard's position. "Ma'am, harassing royal guards and interfering with their duties is a serious offense. You'll need to come with me immediately." Victoria looked around desperately, suddenly realizing that the crowd of tourists was no longer looking at her with admiration, but with a mixture of embarrassment and disapproval. Her perfect content creation session was rapidly becoming a public relations nightmare. "This is absolutely ridiculous," Victoria protested, her carefully maintained accent beginning to slip back toward her natural speaking voice. "I'm a content creator. I have over 2 million followers. Surely someone of my stature should be allowed some creative freedom." Emma stood frozen behind her camera, unsure whether to continue filming or attempt to help her employer. She had witnessed Victoria talk her way out of difficult situations before, but this felt different. The security officer's demeanor suggested that social media influence wasn't going to resolve this particular problem. Chief Inspector Morrison remained calm but firm as he guided Victoria away from the guard's position. "Ma'am, your social media following is irrelevant to this situation. You've interfered with a royal guard performing his duties, and that's a matter we take very seriously regardless of your perceived celebrity status." Victoria made one final attempt to salvage the situation by appealing to what she assumed was universal recognition of her importance. "Do you have any idea how much positive publicity I could generate for this place? My content reaches millions of people. Surely we can work something out that benefits everyone involved." The inspector's response was immediate and definitive. "Ma'am, Windsor Castle doesn't require publicity from social media influencers. We're a working royal residence with protocols that exist for very important reasons. You've violated those protocols, and there will be consequences." As Chief Inspector Morrison led Victoria toward the castle's security office, she continued protesting loudly enough for her assistant to capture every word. What Victoria didn't realize was that Emma had continued filming throughout the entire confrontation, documenting her employer's downfall with the same professional attention she had given to the intended content creation. "This is absolutely outrageous," Victoria called over her shoulder as she was escorted away. "Wait until my followers hear about this treatment. You have no idea what kind of negative publicity this could generate." Guardsman Crawford remained at his post throughout the entire incident, never moving from his assigned position despite the significant disruption. His professionalism under pressure exemplified exactly why these positions required such extensive training and character assessment. While Victoria had seen him as a prop for her content, he had maintained his dignity and duty despite sustained harassment. The crowd of tourists began to disperse as the excitement ended, though many continued taking photographs and videos. Victoria's public humiliation was being documented by dozens of strangers who would share their footage across social media platforms, creating exactly the kind of viral content she had wanted, but not in the way she had intended. Within the castle's security office, Victoria's confidence completely evaporated as she faced the reality of her situation. Chief Inspector Morrison explained that she would be charged with harassment, disorderly conduct, and interference with royal duties. Her social media following, designer clothing, and perceived celebrity status provided no protection against the legal consequences of her behavior. "I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding," Victoria said, her voice now small and uncertain. "I never meant any disrespect. I was just trying to create engaging content for my followers. Surely we can resolve this without any formal charges." Chief Inspector Morrison reviewed his notes before responding. "Ms. Ashworth, creating content doesn't exempt you from following basic rules of conduct and respect. The guard you were harassing serves this country with honor and distinction. Your behavior was inappropriate regardless of your intentions." As the paperwork was processed and charges were formally filed, Victoria began to understand the magnitude of her mistake. Her assistant, Emma, had already uploaded the footage to Victoria's social media accounts, but the response from followers was overwhelmingly negative. Comments poured in criticizing her disrespectful behavior and praising the guard's professionalism. The hashtag #RespectTheGuard began trending as people shared the footage alongside stories about the dedication and sacrifice required to earn such prestigious positions. Victoria's attempt to showcase her supposed importance had instead highlighted her complete ignorance about the significance of the traditions she had attempted to exploit. By evening, Victoria's follower count had dropped by several 100,000 as people unfollowed her accounts in disgust. Brands that had previously paid her for endorsements began canceling contracts, citing concerns about associating with someone who had shown such blatant disrespect for military service and national traditions. The legal consequences were just the beginning of Victoria's problems. Her reputation as an influencer was permanently damaged, and the footage of her arrest became a cautionary tale about the limits of social media celebrity. Meanwhile, Guardsman Crawford continued his service with the same dedication and professionalism he had always shown, proving that true dignity doesn't require an audience or validation from strangers with cameras. Richard Sterling believed that his Oxford education, family connections, and inherited wealth placed him above the common rules that governed ordinary people. The 42-year-old investment banker had spent his entire life navigating elite social circles where privilege was currency and connections were everything. Standing outside the Tower of London on a foggy Thursday morning, he was about to discover that some institutions remained immune to his particular brand of entitled manipulation. Richard had arrived at the tower with his business associate, Jonathan Hayes. After a particularly expensive lunch where they had consumed several bottles of wine while discussing a multi-million-pound merger. Both men were in celebratory moods, their judgment clouded by alcohol and their usual sense of superiority amplified by recent financial success. "Watch this, Jonathan," Richard slurred slightly, his expensive suit rumpled from the afternoon's drinking. "I'm going to show you how to handle these costumed relics. My family has been contributing to this country for centuries. These guards work for us, really, when you think about it properly." The yeoman warder they approached was Derek Thompson, a former Royal Marine with 30 years of military service who had earned his position at the Tower through exceptional dedication and an encyclopedic knowledge of British history. At 55, Derek had seen everything from genuine historical researchers to drunken tourists, but Richard's particular combination of arrogance and intoxication promised to be especially challenging. Richard strutted toward the guard with the unsteady confidence of someone who had never faced serious consequences for his behavior. His family's name appeared on buildings throughout London. His education had provided him with connections in Parliament, and his bank account allowed him to believe that rules were suggestions rather than requirements. "You there!" Richard called out loudly, his voice carrying the imperious tone he typically reserved for subordinates at his investment firm. "I need you to open the bloody tower immediately. I'm giving a private tour to my associate here, and we don't have time to wait around with the common tourists." Derek remained perfectly still, his colorful Tudor uniform immaculate despite the damp London weather. As a yeoman warder, he was both a ceremonial guard and an expert historian responsible for protecting one of Britain's most important historical sites. His knowledge of the tower's secrets was extensive, but it certainly wasn't available to demanding drunks who believed money could unlock any door. Richard interpreted the guard's silence as subservience rather than professionalism. In his experience, staff members who didn't immediately respond to his demands simply needed additional motivation, usually in the form of more aggressive commands or the promise of financial compensation. "Don't pretend you didn't hear me," Richard continued, stepping closer to Derek while gesturing dramatically with his hands. I'm Richard Sterling of Sterling and Associates. Perhaps you've heard of us? We manage investments for half the peerage in this country. I could have you fired with a single phone call." Jonathan stood behind Richard, looking increasingly uncomfortable with his colleague's behavior. While he shared Richard's sense of entitlement to some degree, he possessed enough social awareness to recognize that they were attracting unwanted attention from other visitors and security personnel throughout the tower grounds. Derek had encountered entitled visitors before, but Richard's combination of drunkenness, aggression, and supposed social status created a particularly volatile situation. The yeoman warder's training emphasized patience and diplomacy, but it also prepared him for moments when those approaches proved insufficient. "Sir," Derek finally spoke, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone accustomed to command. "The Tower of London operates according to strict protocols that apply to all visitors regardless of their background. I suggest you rejoin the regular tour group if you're interested in learning about our history." Richard's face flushed red at what he perceived as insubordination from someone he considered to be a mere employee. In his world, suggestions from staff members were tantamount to rebellion, and rebellion required immediate correction. "Protocols?" Richard laughed harshly, the sound carrying across the courtyard and causing other tourists to turn and stare. "Let me explain something to you about protocols, my good man. My family helped finance the restoration of this place in the 1980s. We're not just visitors here. We're stakeholders." The claim was partially true. Richard's family trust had made a significant donation decades earlier. But his interpretation of what that contribution entitled him to was wildly inaccurate. Derek was well aware of the tower's donor history, and he knew that charitable contributions didn't grant special access to restricted areas or exemption from safety regulations. Richard reached into his jacket pocket and produced a leather wallet thick with credit cards and cash. The gesture was meant to demonstrate his wealth and, presumably, his ability to solve any problem through financial pressure. "Look here," Richard continued, pulling out several 50-pound notes. "I'm prepared to make this worth your while. Just unlock the bloody tower, give us 20 minutes for a private look around, and this money is yours. Everyone benefits, and no one needs to make this complicated." The attempted bribery crossed several legal lines and violated tower security protocols in ways that required immediate intervention. Derek's radio crackled softly as other security personnel confirmed they were monitoring the situation and prepared to respond if necessary. "Sir," Derek said firmly, "what you're suggesting is inappropriate and illegal. I'm going to ask you once to step back and rejoin the regular tour. Any further disruption will result in your removal from the premises." Richard's reaction was immediate and explosive. The combination of alcohol, entitlement, and public contradiction created a perfect storm of rage that overrode any remaining common sense he might have possessed. "Illegal?" Richard shouted, his voice now loud enough to echo off the ancient stone walls. "Do you know who you're talking to? I went to Oxford. I sit on the boards of 3 major charities. I have lunch with members of Parliament. You're some glorified security guard in a costume, and you're going to lecture me about what's legal?" The outburst attracted the attention of every tourist within 100 yards, including several families with children who looked shocked at Richard's aggressive behavior. Security cameras throughout the tower were automatically focusing on the developing situation, and multiple personnel were converging on Derek's position. Jonathan finally attempted to intervene. Recognizing that his colleague was creating a scene that could have serious professional consequences for both of them. "Richard, perhaps we should just take the regular tour and discuss this matter privately later." "Absolutely not." Richard spun around to face Jonathan, his coordination clearly impaired by the afternoon's drinking. "I refuse to be dismissed by some jumped-up tour guide who doesn't understand his place in the social hierarchy. This is exactly the kind of institutional inefficiency that's destroying this country." Chief Security Officer Margaret Foster had been watching the situation, developed from her office overlooking the courtyard. A former Metropolitan Police inspector with extensive experience in crowd control and public order, she recognized that Richard's behavior was escalating beyond what could be managed through gentle persuasion. Richard turned back to Derek with renewed determination, apparently believing that increased volume and aggression would eventually achieve his desired result. "I'm going to give you one final opportunity to do your job properly. Open the bloody tower immediately, or I'll ensure that your supervisors hear about your complete failure to provide appropriate service to important visitors." The threat represented a fundamental misunderstanding of both Derek's role and the tower's operational structure. Yeoman warders weren't customer service representatives who could be intimidated by complaints to management. They were highly trained military veterans responsible for protecting invaluable historical artifacts and ensuring visitor safety in a complex ancient fortress. "Sir," Derek replied with perfect composure, "I am doing my job properly. My job is to protect this historic site and ensure the safety of all visitors. Your behavior is currently threatening both of those responsibilities." Richard's response was to step even closer to Derek, invading his personal space in a clear attempt at physical intimidation. The movement was unsteady due to his intoxication, but the aggressive intent was unmistakable to everyone watching the confrontation. "Don't you dare tell me what threatens safety," Richard snarled, pointing his finger directly at Derek's chest. "The only threat to safety here is your stubborn refusal to accommodate reasonable requests from people who actually matter in this society." Chief Security Officer Foster chose that moment to step forward, her approach so smooth and professional that Richard didn't notice her until she spoke directly behind him. "Mr. Sterling, I'm Margaret Foster, Chief Security Officer for the Tower of London. You're going to need to come with me immediately." Richard spun around so quickly that he nearly lost his balance, his eyes wide with surprise and growing alarm. The appearance of senior security personnel suggested that his confrontation with Derek had escalated beyond a simple disagreement with staff. "Chief Security Officer?" Richard's voice cracked slightly as the implications began to penetrate his alcohol-clouded thinking. "Look, there's clearly been some sort of misunderstanding here. I was simply requesting access that my family's historical relationship with this institution should reasonably provide." Margaret Foster had reviewed Richard's behavior through the security camera system and had no patience for his attempts at diplomatic revision. "Mr. Sterling, you've attempted to bribe a yeoman warder, threatened staff members, and created a public disturbance. These are serious offenses that require immediate attention." The word bribe seemed to sober Richard somewhat as he began to understand that his actions had legal implications beyond simple embarrassment. He looked around desperately, suddenly aware that dozens of tourists were recording the confrontation with their phones. "Bribe is a very strong word," Richard stammered. His earlier confidence completely evaporated. "I was simply offering a gratuity for exceptional service. That's common practice in hospitality industries. Surely there's been some misinterpretation of my intentions." Jonathan stepped forward in a belated attempt to help his colleague, but his own alcohol consumption made his words less than convincing. "Officer, Mr. Sterling is a respected member of the financial community. I'm sure any perceived impropriety was simply the result of miscommunication." Margaret Foster turned her attention briefly to Jonathan, her expression making it clear that his intervention wasn't helpful. "Sir, you're welcome to remain silent, but any further attempts to interfere with this investigation will result in charges against you as well." The mention of charges and investigation sent a chill through both men as they began to realize the serious nature of their situation. Richard's mind raced through the potential consequences: criminal charges, professional embarrassment, damage to his family's reputation, and the very real possibility that videos of his arrest would circulate throughout his social and professional circles. "Investigation?" Richard's voice was now barely above a whisper. "Surely this can be resolved without involving the legal system. I'm prepared to make a substantial donation to the tower's restoration fund. Everyone makes mistakes, and I'm certainly willing to make amends for any misunderstanding. The attempted resolution through financial contribution only reinforced the seriousness of Richard's misunderstanding about his situation. Margaret Foster had heard similar offers countless times from people who believed money could erase criminal behavior. "Mr. Sterling," she said firmly, "attempting to resolve criminal charges through donations is itself a form of corruption. You're making your situation significantly worse with every word you speak." Derek remained at his post throughout the entire confrontation, his professionalism unwavering, despite the sustained harassment he had endured. As Margaret Foster led Richard away in handcuffs, the yeoman warder continued his duties with the same dignity and dedication he showed every day. The crowd of tourists gradually dispersed, though many continued discussing the incident long after Richard's removal. Videos of the confrontation quickly appeared on social media, where they were shared with commentary ranging from satisfaction at seeing privilege checked to amazement that anyone could be so disrespectful at such a sacred historical site. Richard's legal troubles were just beginning, but the damage to his reputation was immediate and permanent. His investment firm's clients began questioning whether they wanted their financial affairs handled by someone who displayed such poor judgment and disrespect for British institutions. The very connections and status that Richard had believed made him untouchable became liabilities as his behavior reflected poorly on everyone associated with him. Derek Thompson continued his service as a yeoman warder, protecting the Tower of London and sharing its remarkable history with visitors who approached with appropriate respect and genuine interest. His encounter with Richard Sterling became another story in the long history of a fortress that had witnessed centuries of human arrogance meeting immovable consequences.